Yo, what is going on? Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of your favorite, it is weekly show, but almost online, almost live show, I should say, welcome to Fantasy Haus Live. As per usual, we are going to cover the, what happened all over the course of the last week, the updated power rankings, and of course we're going to get into a dive into what the next kind of set of games as we wind down to the bottom of the last few games in our regular season, or last few weeks I should say, of our regular season. So without too much further ado, we shall get right into the action. It was another exciting week in the Hooligan House. Week 13 provided us with a lot of action, so we shall get into it. In our first matchup, we saw yet another upset coming out of the defending champ and Champ Cheese, pulling off the upset against Destino, who was sitting at number 1, getting upset by a score of 121 to 112. In our next matchup, we had the Cheetah Hill continuing their winning ways over a once was surging Bob's Burgers team by a score of 116 to 103. Then moving right along into our third matchup, we had Nuge, aka Team Nugent, getting the big win over CD's Nuts by a huge margin of 167 to 105. Then in our fourth matchup, it saw the Lame Tanks getting a win over the BJJs, who've been kind of on the downfall as of late, with a score of 123 to 58. And then finally, in our Battle of the Brothers, it was Chicago Deviants and Team Breaky, with Team Breaky getting the win this week by a score of 153 to 63. But the fun doesn't just stop there. As per usual, we're going to dive straight into how these broke down. And as per usual, we're going to start with our our game of the week and our first matchup between Destino and Champ Cheese. This is how it broke down. So as we start at the top, we see that Patrick Mahomes was able to get 22 points in that loss to Cincinnati, while Jimmy G exited the game with, I think it was like a season-ending ankle injury that requires surgery, so he only got 2.8 points. Then in the first set of running backs, Destino had Nick Chubb, who had a down game against Houston, which is surprising, only getting 8 points, while Delvin Cook was able to get 16 points in the win over the Jets, which is, Delvin, is always capable of putting up those numbers, but seeing Nick Chubb only able to put up 8 against a pretty vulnerable and terrible Houston defense is kind of shocking. Moving into the next set of running backs, we have Samaj P. Ryan, who had a very good day, able to get 21 points in the win over Kansas City, while Saquon Barkley continuing to have a wonderful season, able to get 19 points in the tie with Washington, which I'm pretty sure they have to but they redo that game. I say redo, but they're in the same division, so they have to play each other twice, but that matchup is going to happen again very soon. Moving into the first set of wide receivers, we have DK Metcalf getting 26 points in a very good game against the Rams, who've been pretty much decimated by injuries. Then for Champ Cheese, you have Justin Jefferson able to get 18 points in the win over the Jets, while we continue into the next set of wide receivers. For Destino, we have Adam Thielen able to get only 4 points in that win over the Jets, while for Champ Cheese, Christian Watson, the rookie sensation, having an incredible series of games for the Packers, able to put it together another 2 touchdowns in the win over Chicago, the come from behind win over Chicago. Then in the tight end pairing, we have Travis Kelce for... Moving into our tight end matchup, we had Travis Kelce only able to get 7 points in the loss to Cincinnati, while Dalton Schultz able to get 5 in the win over Indy, in which case you would think he would have been able to get a bit more, despite the fact it was a 54-19 blowout win. Moving into the flex positions, we have Brandon Ayuk for Destino throwing up 9 points in the win over Miami, while David Montgomery was able to get 16 points in the loss to Green Bay for Champ Cheese. Then in the defenses, Destino had the Ravens give him 7 points in that win over Denver, while Champ Cheese and the Seahawks were able to get 8 this week in the win over the Rams. Then finally, in our kicker matchup, Harrison Butker was able to get 5 points in the Chiefs win or Chiefs loss to Cincy, while Jason Myers was able to get 10 points in the Seattle win over the Rams. Okay, and that is how the first one went down. In our next matchup, it's where is it? The Cheetah Hill picking up a win over Bob's Burgers, who was surging. So as always, we start at the top. Dak Prescott continuing to have a good season, able to throw up 18 points in the win over Indianapolis, while Justin Herbert able to throw up 21 points in the loss to Las Vegas for Bob's Burgers. Then switching back to the Cheetah Hill in our first running back matchup, it's Austin Eckler, aka the Muscle Hamster, getting 13 points in the loss to Las Vegas, while Cordell Patterson for Bob's Burgers was able to get 6 points in the loss to Pittsburgh. Then in running back matchup 2, Travis Etienne, who actually, I think this was his return from injury game, only able to get 7 points in the blowout loss to Detroit, while Jamal Williams on the opposite side of the field, they're able to only get 9 points in the blowout win over Jacksonville. In the battle of wide receivers, we see Mr. Tyreek Hill for the Cheetah Hill, obviously his team's namesake, able to get 29 points in the loss to San Francisco, while Scary Terry McLaurin for the Washington Commanders, able to get 24 points in the tie with the Giants. Then while we skip on into the next set of wide receivers, where it was a showdown, Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Cheetah Hill and the Detroit Lions. Amon-Ra able to get 34 points as he had himself a day during that blowout win, while Drake London also able to have himself quite a decent day himself, able to get 15 points in that despite losing to Pittsburgh for Bob's Burgers. In the tight end matchup, it's Dawson Knox to throw up a donut for the Cheetah Hill, while TJ Hawkinson for Mr. Bob's Burgers was able to get 7.3 points in a win over the Jets. Then in the battle of the flex position, Mr. Jalen Waddle saw only one point in the loss to San Francisco for Mr. Cheetah Hill, while Bob's Burgers was able to have Chris Olave, who was able to throw up another modest 10 points in the losing 1-point loss to Tampa Bay. Then in the battle of the defenses, for the Cheetah Hill, the Dolphins threw up 5 points in the loss to San Francisco, while the Saints threw up 5 points for Bob's Burgers despite a loss to Tampa. And then finally in the battle of the kickers, starting first with the Cheetah Hill, Brett Maher was able to get 6 points in the win over Indy, while Justin Tucker for Bob's Burgers was only able to get 4 points in the narrow 1-point win over Denver. Alright, our third matchup saw Nuge get the biggest win margin this week, or one of the biggest win margins this week, in a win over CD's Nuts. And we shall take a look at how it broke down. So, starting off for CD, Tua able to get 16 points in the loss to San Francisco, while for Nuge, Trevor Lawrence was able to get 18 points in the loss to Detroit. Then moving into the battle of running backs, For CD, he had Dameon Pierce, who went off for about 12 points in the loss to Cleveland. Then for Nuge, he had Christian McCaffrey able to get 28 points in the win over Miami. Then moving straight on into the next set of running backs, we had Ramondre Stevenson for CD's Nuts, able to get about 13 points in the loss to Buffalo, while Tony Pollard for Nuge was able to get 24 points in the win over Indy. Tony Pollard, making it look like he deserves to be that number one back there, and he pretty much is at the moment. Anyways, moving into the next set or next matchup, which is the wide receivers. Flipping back to CD's Nuts here. Mike Evans only able to get 9 points this week in a 1-point win over New Orleans, while controversially on the other side, CD Lamb able to get 20 points for Nuge in the huge win over Indianapolis. Then into wide receiver matchup 2, there is Garrett Wilson for CD, able to get 24 points in the pretty narrow loss to Minnesota, while T. Higgins for Nuge, continuing to have himself an amazing season, able to get 12 points in the win over KC. Then moving into the tight ends, he had Tyler Conklin for CD's Nuts, able to get only 2 points in the loss to Minnesota, while Mark Andrews able to get only 9. And I also heard that he is actually, with a lot of that Baltimore team kind of injured right now. Moving into the flex spot, CD's Nuts had Joe Mixon unfortunately get a goose egg. I don't think he played. Yeah, he did not play. While on the opposite side for AJ, or for Mr. Nuge here, he had AJ Brown, who had himself a phenomenal day in that win over Tennessee, that revenge game again in Tennessee, where he went off for 31. Moving into the battle of the defenses, where it saw for CD, the Eagles were able to get 11 points in that blowout win over Tennessee, while for Nuge, the Cowboys were able to get 19 in that blowout win over Indy. Then in the battle of the kickers, Young Ho Koo for Atlanta for CD's Nuts was able to get 14 points in the loss to Pittsburgh, while Nick Folk was able to only get 3 points in the loss to Buffalo for Mr. Nuge. As we stroll right along into our next matchup, which saw the Lame Tanks pulling off an upset against the BJJs by a score of 123 to 58. And as always, we start at the top. So for the BJJs, they had Deshaun Watson starting this week, scoring only 6 points in a revenge game against Houston. While for the Lame Tanks, Josh Allen continues to have himself a nice little season, adding 19 points while getting the win in New England. Then in the first set of running backs, for the BJJs, Derrick Henry only able to get 5 points in that blowout loss to Philly, while for the Lame Tanks, Mr. JT, the former Badger himself, Jonathan Taylor, kind of starting to look like himself, able to get 13 points despite where he is on that struggling Indianapolis team. They did lose badly to Dallas, but he was able to get 13 points in that. In the next set of running backs, Kenneth Walker for the BJJs was only able to get 6 points, so this was probably his first down week in a long time. While DeAndre Swift, who's been kind of spotty, although he was injured for the little earlier parts of the season, so that obviously did play a part into it. And Jamal Williams being there and being so dominant is also kind of cut into that. But whenever DeAndre Swift is on the field, he is making plays. That's why he's got 21 points in that big win over Jacksonville for the Lame Tanks. Now we're going to move into the wide receiver matchups, where for the BJJs, Mr. Michael Pittman Jr. was only able to get 3 points in that big loss to Dallas, while for Lame Tanks, Amari Cooper able to get 8 points, so pretty modest, middle of the field there. But a win nonetheless there in Houston. Then in the next set of wide receivers, Cortland Sutton put up a donut. I have a feeling that he sat out with injury. I think so. Can't tell. But he was able to threw up that donut while Tyler Lockett had 27 points for Lame Tanks in that Seahawks win over the Rams. Then in the tight end spot, Taysom Hill, the gadget man for New Orleans, able to get 13 points, while George Kittle, one of the stars of that San Francisco offense, only able to get 4 points after the switch from Jimmy G. Then in the flex positions, we see Alvin Kamara for the BJJs, only able to get 5 points this week in a 1 point loss to Tampa. While for the Lame Tanks, Devin Singletary able to get a very good 11 points for him in a win over New England. Devin Singletary, just kind of another one of those streaky backs. Moving into the defenses, we have the Broncos able to get 13 points in the 1 point loss to Baltimore, while for the Lame Tanks, the Packers only able to get 5 points in the comeback win over the Bears. Then finally, in our kickers, it saw Cameron Dicker throw up 7 points for the Lame Tanks in a 7 point loss to the Raiders, while the Lame Tanks, that was for the BJJs, while for the Lame Tanks, they had Matt Gay, who was able to throw up 14 points despite losing to the Seahawks. Lastly, for the week, that brings us to the Chicago Deviants and Team Breaky. Another battle of the brothers, in which case it saw Team Breaky pulling off another upset for the week. And as always, we start at the top with our QBs. So with the Deviants, Lamar Jackson only able to get 1 point before going out with injury, so that's obviously going to contribute heavily to why the score is so lopsided. While Jalen Hurts for Team Breaky continuing an almost MVP-like season, throwing up 38 points in the big blowout win over Tennessee. Then back to the Deviants here with Leonard Fournette in our first set of running backs, who was able to get 14 points in the win over New Orleans, while Cam Akers, who magically is appearing in this Rams offense, mostly due to injury, had 19 points in that loss to Seattle. Then in the next set of running backs, we have Miles Sanders for the Deviants, throwing up 11 points in the win over Tennessee, while Jones for the Packers was able to get 10 points in the win over Chicago for Team Breaky. Then in our wide receiver matchups, we have Robert Woods to start us off for the Deviants, able to get only 1 point this week in a loss to Philly, while Stephon Diggs for Team Breaky was able to get 22 points in the win over New England. Then in the next set of wide receivers, we have George Pickens, again for the Deviants, who had been pretty consistent these last couple weeks, came back down to earth a little bit here with only 1 point this week in the win over Atlanta, while Devontae Adams continuing to show the league that he is that man, able to get 37 points this week in a win over the Chargers. Then moving into the tight ends, we have Hunter Henry throwing up 3 points in the loss to Buffalo for the Deviants, while Freiermuth for Team Breaky able to have 10 points, who's actually been having himself quite the strong end to season here. In the flex matchup, we have Michael Gallup able to get 18 points in that big win over Indy, while for Team Breaky, he had Allen Robinson, who I'm pretty sure who was one of those injured players that did not play for the Rams, throwing up 0. Then in the battle of the defenses, the Rams were only able to get 5 points in the loss to Seattle, while Team Breaky's Bills were able to get 6 points in the win over New England. Then finally, Tyler Bass and the Buffalo Bills were able to get the win over New England, which translated to 7 points for the Deviants, while Daniel Carlson in the win over the Chargers was able to get 10 points. And that, I believe, concludes the reviews, which now brings us to everyone's favorite segment, the Power Rankings. There was just a teeny bit of shaking once again, starting with our top dogs. Nuge reclaims his spot at the top with a big win this week. The Cheetah Hill. Nuge also has a 9-4 record on the season. The Cheetah Hill locking down that 2 spot, also sitting at a 9-4 record. Then, unfortunately, Destino only spending 1 week at number 1, now dropping to number 3 with an 8-5 record. Then, jumping up to the 4th spot is Champ Cheese with a 7-6 record, while Bob's Burgers drops down to 5th with a 7-6 record. CD's Nuts dropped down to 6th with a 6-7 record. The Deviants remained in the 7th position with a 6-7 record. In Team 8, or in 8th spot, is the Lame Tanks, who have climbed from the dumpster fires finally, and have made themselves have a 5-8 record, which is better, which is good enough to get them out of the dumpster fires. While the BJJs continue to fall from grace, falling to 4-9 on the season, and also into 9th spot, while Team Breaky remains at 10. And now that brings us to our last section here, which is, as always, the preview of the next incoming week. It is going to be a hell of a week. So to start off, and in one of the biggest matchups of this season, we have number 1 top dog, Team Nuge, taking on number 2 top dog in the Cheetah Hill. Both of them sitting at a 9-4 record. This could have huge implications for people. Well, actually, really don't have implications for Destino and maybe Champ Cheese and Bob's Burgers. So, okay, this could work for it's mostly for like people that have like a couple within like a game or two. Then in matchup number 2, we have Destino going against CD's Nuts. Then in the third matchup of the week, we have Chicago Deviants taking on Bob's Burgers, who are looking to bounce back from a loss last week. Then in our fourth matchup, we have Champ Cheese, who is feeling awesome, having upset 2 number 1 top dogs, now taking on the BJJs, who have been falling consistently, unfortunately. And then in our final matchup of the week, we have Team Breaky. This is 2 teams that spent a lot of time in the dumpster fire. Lame Tanks recently got out, but Team Breaky also just got a win, just like the Lame Tanks. So this will be interesting to see where this one goes. Now, let's take a look at how these are going to break down and take some picks, shall we? So we have Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville going against Tennessee versus Dak Prescott and Dallas going against Houston. Ooh. Gotta go Dak and Houston on this one. I think Houston's just terrible. I mean, Tennessee's not that great either, but I think they're a little bit better than Houston. Then in the next battle of running backs, we have Austin Eckler and the Chargers going against Miami versus Christian McCaffrey and San Fran going against Tampa. I think between these 2 running backs, I think I'd probably go Christian McCaffrey. That Tampa Bay defense is not that great. I know Miami defense has been a bit streaky, and Austin Eckler is the man, so he's going to put up numbers regardless. But I think there's a bit of a higher ceiling with McCaffrey if he can stay healthy, especially with Jimmy G being out. So the game might just have to run through him, literally. Then in the next battle of running backs, we have Tony Pollard in Dallas going against Houston versus Travis Etienne and Jacksonville going against Tennessee. So we just kind of talked about this a little bit. Tony Pollard, though, I do expect to have the better day compared to Travis Etienne, who only had like 7 points last week, and he's still kind of coming back off injury. So I totally expect Pollard to have the better day. In the battle of wide receivers, we have CD in Dallas going against Houston versus Ty Freak and Miami going against the Chargers. The matchup is there for CD, but I'm going to give this one to Tyreek. He's literally produced with every game that he's been in this year, every game that he's like pretty much gotten the ball this season. He's been spectacular. In the next matchup of wide receivers, we see Mr. T. Higgins in Cincy going against Cleveland versus Amon-Ra in Detroit going against Minnesota. I think Mr. T. Higgins will have the better day. Although Amon-Ra I know is a beast and Detroit scores a lot of points, but I think that Minnesota game and Minnesota's corners are just like a hair better, but I'll probably eat my words on that one 100%. Then in the battle of the tight ends, we have Mark Andrews in Baltimore going against Dawson Knox in Buffalo. Now Mark Andrews is, from what I heard, he's also kind of like dealing with injury, but he's also going to have Tyler Huntley thrown to him and not Lamar due to injury. So it'd be kind of risky, but we still might go with Dawson Knox, even though they're going to get to the Jets, and he did throw up a donut last week.
Then in the flex spot, we have AJ Brown and Philly going against the Giants versus Jalen Waddle, and Miami going against the Chargers. If the Giants weren't actually a good team, even if, or Jalen Waddle and going off against the Chargers. Yeah, I think Jalen actually will have the better day here because it is against that Chargers defense who they do have a few pieces, but I think that Dolphins offense is just too good this year. In the defenses, we have the Cowboys and Dallas going against Houston versus Dolphins going against the Chargers. However, when it comes to the defense, definitely got to go Cowboys. They are just turnover machines there in Dallas. Then in the kicker matchup, we have Nick Folk in New England going against Arizona versus Brett Maher in Dallas going against Houston. Actually, I think I'm going to go with Folk on this one. Pretty dependable kicker, and I think New England and Arizona is a pretty even matchup that might cause them to kick a lot of field goals. Then in our next matchup, we have Destino taking on These nuts. And in our first matchup, with the QBs, we have Patrick Mahomes and KC taking on Denver versus Tua and Miami against the Chargers. Gotta go Mahomes. Denver's defense is not that great, and Mahomes is just too damn good. In the running backs, we have Nick Chubb and Cleveland going against Cincy versus Damian Pierce and Houston going against Dallas. Chubb easy because Houston is not good going against a very stout and terribly tough Dallas defense. Then in running backs number 2, we have Samaj P. Ryan and Cincy going against Cleveland versus Ramondre Stevenson and New England going against Arizona. Got to go Ramondre Stevenson on this one. He's just been having a phenomenal season, and Arizona's defense is kind of more in the middle of the pack, and Stevenson has pretty much produced almost every game despite the fact they don't have the greatest record. Then in the battle of wide receivers, we have DK Metcalf in Seattle going against Carolina versus Mike Evans in Tampa going against San Fran. Definitely DK. Geno Smith has proven that he is also that dude and should have been starting somewhere long ago. And DK also coming off a huge game going against a Carolina team that is pretty much reeling. In the wide receiver 2 matchup, we have Adam Thielen in Minnesota going against Detroit versus Garrett Wilson and the Jets going against Buffalo. I think Garrett Wilson on this one. It's strange to think that Mike White? Mike White might be that dude for them, but I think Garrett Wilson's also been balling out with the Jets there. And the Buffalo has shown that they can be exposed at times. So I think Garrett Wilson will put up the better stat line, while I think Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook will probably even TJ Hawkinson will probably get the ball more than I think Thielen will. Thielen will probably get some short yardage throws, but I don't expect him to have a huge day, even though it is against Detroit. Then in the tight ends, we have Travis Kelce going against Denver versus Tyler Conklin and the Jets going against Buffalo. Gotta go Kelce. He's just too damn good. He's put up huge numbers all season, so rolling Kelce. Moving to the flex spot, we have Ayuk and San Fran going against Tampa versus Joe Mixon and Cincy going against Cleveland, if he does play. So we'll assume Joe Mixon plays, but that Cleveland defense is going to be pretty stout. So he might not have the greatest day if he returns from injury then, but we'll roll Joe Mixon on this one. Moving to defenses, we have the Ravens and Baltimore going against Pittsburgh versus the Eagles and Philly going against. Gotta go Eagles. They're one of the best teams in the league. Best team in the NFC. Gonna be a tough NFC East battle there. Then in the final matchup, we have kickers, Harrison Butker and the Chiefs going against Denver versus McPherson, and the Bengals going against Cleveland. I think we'll have to go with Butker on this one, just because Denver is not that great of a team. However, you could see Mahomes sometimes sputter out, mostly just sputter out, which could lead to Harrison Butker getting some opportunities there. Then in our third matchup, we have the Deviants taking on Bob's Burgers. Starting at the top, so there's Lamar and Baltimore going against Pitt versus Justin Herbert and Chargers going against Houston. Lamar, I'm pretty sure, is out with Tyler Huntley starting. So Herbert. Moving into the running backs, we have Fournette and Tampa going against San Fran versus Cordell and Atlanta, who's on a bye, so you got to go Fournette. Moving into the next set of running backs, we have Miles Sanders in Philly going against the Giants versus Jamal Williams in Detroit going against Minnesota. Ooh, this is a good matchup. How Miles Sanders actually having a very good season, but just like Jamal, I'm gonna go out on a limb, say Jamal Williams gonna have the better day on this one. Then moving into the first set of wide receivers, we have Robert Woods and Tennessee going against Jacksonville versus Scary Terry. Oh, nope. Have to go with Robert Woods on this one because Scary Terry's on bye. Same thing with the next wide receiver matchup. Got to go automatically with Pickens because Drake London is on bye. In the tight end matchup, we have Hunter Henry in New England going against Arizona versus TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota going against Detroit. Ooh, got to go with TJ Hawkinson on this one. Just too good of a tight end. Move to a new team going against Detroit, which is, just Detroit. They're unfortunately not that great this season. And haven't been for a bit, but that's neither here nor there. Then in the flex matchup, we have to go with Gallup because Olave is on bye. Same thing with the Saints defense, so we got to go with the Rams. Then in the kicker matchup, so this is actually super quick. Tyler Bass versus Buffalo versus the Jets versus Justin Tucker and Baltimore going against Pittsburgh. I think Justin Tucker might have a more of a role in that game, especially with a backup QB. So I think the chance for him to have more points is definitely up there for sure. Okay, in our next matchup, we have Champ Cheese taking on the BJJs. Starting at the top, as per usual, we have Kyler Murray in Arizona going against New England versus Deshaun Watson in Cleveland going against Cincy. Deshaun Watson did not look good in his opening game against Houston. Roll with Kyler on this one, but could totally see that the New England defense kind of boxes them in a little bit. Moving into the running backs, we have Dalvin Cook in Minnesota going against Detroit versus Derrick Henry in Tennessee going against Jacksonville. Ooh, tough matchup because these are two top running backs going against two very, technically Jacksonville's defense probably a bit better than Detroit, so I guess based on just that, I'll roll with Dalvin having the better day, but I'm gonna be totally prepared to eat my words and see King Henry just mosh his way through everyone. Then in the next set of running backs, we have Saquon and the Giants taking on Philly versus Kenneth Walker and Seattle taking on Carolina. If Kenneth Walker is healthy, gotta go with Kenneth Walker, just purely based on that matchup. That Carolina is just not good. Then in the wide receivers, we have, it's got to go to Justin Jefferson because Michael Pittman is on bye. And then in the next set of wide receivers, we have Devontae Smith in Philly going against the Giants versus Cortland Sutton in Denver going against KC. Cortland Sutton is actually marked as doubtful, so we'll just probably consider him out. Unfortunately, just give that to Devontae. Then in the tight end spot, also got to give this to Dalton Schultz because Taysom Hill is out. Same thing with Alvin Kamara, who is out in that flex spot, so that goes to Dante Foreman, who's currently questionable for Carolina going against Seattle. Then in the battle of the defenses, we have the Broncos taking on KC. Probably have to go with Seattle on this one as they go against Carolina. Like I just said, not a good team. Then finally in the battle of the kickers, we have Jason Myers in Seattle going against Carolina versus Cameron Dicker and Chargers taking on Miami. Probably roll Jason Myers, who's been one of the top kickers in the league, going against a not so good team in Carolina. Then finally we have the Lame Tanks taking on Team Breaky in our final matchup of the week. So here it is. Starting at the top, as per usual, we have Jalen Hurts in Philly going against the Giants versus Josh Allen in Buffalo going against the Jets. Ooh, this is going to be a shootout, but for I think both of these teams. But I'm going to guess that Josh Allen's going to have the better day. The Giants defense is actually pretty decent. In the battle of the running backs, we have Cam Akers and the Rams going against Las Vegas versus DeAndre Swift and Detroit going against Minnesota. I'm going to have to roll DeAndre Swift. I just think that he's just the better back with a higher ceiling, although Minnesota's defense is a little bit better. moving into the next set of running backs, got to instantly roll with Devin Singletary because Aaron Jones is on bye. Then in the first set of wide receivers, we have Stephon Diggs and Buffalo going against the Jets versus Amari Cooper, and Cleveland going against Cincy. With Deshaun under center, Amari is not doing so hot yet, so we're going to have to roll with Stephon going against the Jets. Then in the next set of wide receivers, we have Devontae and the Raiders going against the Rams versus Tyler Lockett and Seattle going against Carolina. Oof. Got to pick on the Rams, who are pretty much just decimated here with Devontae. Then in the tight end matchup, we have Pat Freiermuth and Pittsburgh going against Baltimore versus George Kittle and San Fran versus versus Tampa Bay. I think they could have definitely a similar stat line, but I think Freiermuth might actually have the better day. Then in the next flex matchup, Allen Robinson is IR, so that's going to go to Tyler Boyd. And the defenses, Packers are on bye, so that's going to go to Bills defense. Then finally, for kickers, Daniel Carlson and the Raiders take on the Rams versus Matt Gay and the Rams taking on the Raiders. And I think I might roll with Daniel Carlson being a bit more effective in that match and getting more. Thank you guys for coming in to hang out for this super quick and pretty short. This is actually the shortest episode yet, I think, where we covered the review from the last week. We went in over all the scores. Then we quickly went over the power rankings with the updated ranks for this week. And then finally we went into the preview for the next week and kind of made our pick'em, I guess, for the week. But that's going to do it for me, and I will catch you guys hopefully in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and also let me hear about it down below. And I will see you guys later. As always, peace out, stay safe, much love, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!